The girl by the roadside. The wind was sharp that morning. It whispered through the narrow streets of the small mountain town, tugging at scarves, bending trees, and brushing past the people who moved with purpose under the pale sky. Keanu Reeves had arrived quietly the night before, parking his black motorcycle by an old inn and checking into a modest room with a view of the hills. He was seeking silence, something away from the noise of fame and flashing lights. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. Not his agent, not his friends. Just a small note to his assistant that read, "Gone for a ride." As he walked down the cobbled street that morning, hands tucked into his worn coat, he wasn't expecting anything unusual. Just tea. A quiet place to sit. Maybe a corner shop with a kind old woman serving biscuits and pouring out warm kindness. Instead, he saw a group of loud bikers clustered outside a roadside tea stall. They weren't tourists. They weren't locals either. They were passing through, their black leather jackets marked with the symbols of a group Keanu didn't recognize. But their behavior spoke louder than any emblem could. Then he saw her. She stood behind the counter, maybe 19, maybe younger. A girl with a white scarf and eyes that didn't lift when people spoke. She moved slowly, as if every motion required her to push through some invisible wall. Her hands trembled when she poured the tea, and the moment. She offered the tray to the man with a dragon tattoo on his neck. Keanu's instinct screamed. Something about her posture, the way her shoulders tensed, the way she didn't meet the biker's eyes. The man with the tattoo took the tea, sneered, and looked at his friends. He whispered something cruel, and they laughed. She didn't react, not even when he grabbed the cup, sniffed it dramatically, and said too loud, "This tastes like you brewed it with your tears." His friends roared with laughter. She stood still, lips tight, eyes down. Then it happened. In one careless, vicious movement, the biker tossed the hot tea straight at her face. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. The girl let out a small cry, staggering back, her scarf soaking, skin already turning red. She tried to hide her face, turning to the side, tears mixing with the scalding liquid. The bikers laughed again, louder this time, like they were at a show. Keanu didn't move at first. He didn't have to. His silence was sharper than any shout. He stepped forward, boots crunching on the stone, his shadow falling between the girl and the laughing men. The noise died. Not because they knew who he was, not yet, but because there was something about him. A stillness that didn't belong, a calm that carried weight. The biker who threw the tea frowned. "What's your problem, old man?" Keanu didn't answer. He looked at the girl. Her hands were shaking, her eyes wide with fear. Then he looked at the cup on the ground, steaming, beside her feet. "You think that's funny?" Keanu asked softly. The man smirked. She deserved it. Maybe she'll learn to smile next time someone talks to her. "Maybe," Keanu replied, stepping closer. "You need to learn what kindness looks like." The tension snapped like a tight string. The other bikers started to move, circling him slowly. One cracked his knuckles. Another muttered something under his breath. The man with the dragon tattoo rolled his neck and squared his shoulders, thinking he had the upper hand. But Keanu Reeves didn't flinch. What they didn't know, what the world sometimes forgot, was that behind the screen rolls, behind the humble smile and quiet demeanor, was a man who had walked through fire. A man who had trained, fought, and endured. Not just in movies, in life. The girl clutched her scarf to her face, watching through watery eyes. Keanu raised his hand slowly. Not to strike, not to fight, but to reach for the tea kettle on the stall behind her. He poured it into a fresh cup, careful, quiet, then placed it on the counter. "This is how you give someone tea," he said, with respect. The bikers didn't laugh this time. Their leader scowled, face turning red. "You think you're better than us?" Keanu didn't answer. His eyes didn't need words. The stall owner, an elderly man with a limp, appeared from behind the curtain, horrified. "Please," he whispered to Keanu, "don't get involved. They're dangerous." Keanu turned to him and smiled gently. "Danger doesn't go away when we look the other way." A beat passed, then the man, with the dragon tattoo, lunged. Everything moved fast and yet slow. Like time paused out of respect, Keanu sidestepped with fluid grace, one hand guiding the biker's momentum into the ground. No violence, no punch, just precision. The biker crashed hard, groaning, dust rising around him. The others hesitated. "You want to keep going?" Keanu asked, voice calm. "Or are you done proving how weak men handle their anger?" The second biker backed away. Then the third. One by one, they turned, helped their friend up, and slinked off, their pride dented more than their bodies. The street was silent again. Keanu turned to the girl. She still held her scarf against her cheek. He reached into his coat pocket and gently handed her a clean handkerchief. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slightly, but her lips quivered. The stall owner rushed to her side. "Myra," he said, "let me see." She let the scarf drop just a little. The red mark was angry, raw, but the worst wound wasn't on her skin. It was in her eyes, the kind that told of stories not spoken. Keanu stayed quiet. "Come," the old man said. "Sit down, I'll make you new tea." But Keanu didn't sit. Not yet. He looked around. The people who had watched, the ones who had said nothing. He didn't judge them. He knew fear. He knew silence. But something had to change. "What's your name?" he asked her softly. The girl hesitated. "Myra," she whispered. "Myra," he said with a small smile. "You have the strength of fire in you." Her eyes welled up again, but this time it wasn't from pain. "You think so?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "I saw it when you didn't. Fall apart." That evening, the story of what happened spread through the town. Some said he was just a stranger. Others began to whisper that it was Keanu Reeves. But Myra didn't care about the name. She remembered only the way he stood for her when no one else did. And as the sun set and the mountains turned gold, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would no longer shrink from the world. But what none of them knew was that the biker with the dragon tattoo wasn't done, and he had just made a call to someone much worse. Whispers of revenge, the night settled over the town like a thick, restless blanket. The street lamps buzzed faintly, their yellow glow flickering on the damp cobblestones. Somewhere beyond the hills, a thunderstorm rumbled in the distance, but it hadn't reached the valley yet. Inside the small tea stall, the warmth of a single light bulb cast long shadows on the walls. Myra sat on a wooden bench, her fingers curled around a warm cup of chamomile tea. Her face still stung, but the pain had dulled. Now, something heavier lingered inside her, a strange mix of confusion, fear, and hope. Keanu sat across from her, quietly sipping his own tea. He hadn't said much since the incident. He hadn't needed to. His presence alone was like a steady flame in a world full of sudden wind. The tea stall owner, known to most as Baba John, occasionally glanced at Myra with concern, then at Keanu, with gratitude. But the silence between them was comforting, not awkward. It was the kind of silence that gave space for thoughts to settle. Myra finally spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. "You didn't have to do that. They could have hurt you." Keanu looked at her, his gaze kind but firm. "Sometimes doing nothing hurts more." Her eyes lowered. "I'm used to people doing nothing." He nodded slowly as if he understood that feeling far too well. "I used to be one of them," he said, "until I realized silence makes bullies louder." Outside, the streets had grown quieter. Most of the bikers had disappeared after their leader was humiliated, but not all of them. Two remained at the edge of the village, sitting on their idling bikes, making phone calls in hushed tones, eyes sharp and angry. One of them, a tall man, with a greasy ponytail, spoke into his phone with a tone that vibrated with venom. "He threw Zakir to the ground," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I don't care if it was some actor or monk. Nobody humiliates our crew like that." The voice on the other end of the line was cold, commanding. "Where are you now?" "Just outside town, near the old petrol station." "Wait there. I'm coming." "And bring the fire." He hung up. The man's name was Rafik, and he wasn't like the others. He didn't ride for fun. He rode to prove something, to break things, to remind the world that fear still had a face, and that face was his. Meanwhile, inside the tea stall, Baba John laid out an old photo album in front of Keanu. The pages were yellowing, but each picture told a piece of the town's story. Weddings, festivals, generations of smiles frozen in time. He pointed to one image of a little girl sitting by a samovar, her eyes wide, a scarf tied clumsily around her hair. "That's Myra," he said with pride. "Before the fire." Keanu blinked. "Fire?" Baba John's eyes clouded. 2 years ago. Her house burned down. Her parents didn't make it. She was found in the alley, unconscious. Since then, she lives with me." Keanu looked at Myra again. The strength he saw earlier now had deeper roots. She hadn't just faced bullies. She had walked through ashes. "And the bikers?" he asked. "They've passed through before," Baba John said with a sigh. "Never this bad, but they get bolder each time." Keanu set his cup down. "Then we'll need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For when they come back." Just then, a soft knock tapped at the wooden stall door. Baba John opened it cautiously. It was a young boy, panting, sweat on his brow. "They're back," he said quickly. "Not the same ones. Worse." Keanu stood slowly, already pulling on his coat. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. At the edge of the town, Rafik and his men had gathered. Near their bikes, flames from a lighter dancing in one hand. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't shouting, he was planning. His rage wasn't loud, and it was methodical. "We'll teach him a lesson," he growled, "and anyone who stands with him." Across town, Keanu walked with quiet purpose. He had lived many lives, as a young actor with dreams, as a grieving man with ghosts, as a hero in stories both real and imagined. But none of those versions mattered now. Right now, he was just a man trying to do what was right. Myra walked beside him, unsure, her steps small but determined. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He looked down at her, a small smile curling at the edge of his mouth. "Because someone once did it for me." They reached the town square, where the first signs of trouble were already brewing. Rafik stood by a burning trash can, his crew circling him like wolves. Villagers peeked from windows but didn't come out. Fear had silenced them. Keanu walked into the square like it was a stage. No armor, no backup, just heart. "You must be the one who thinks fear is strength," he said, voice steady. Rafik turned, surprised by the calmness. "And you must be the fool who thinks kindness wins fights." "No," Keanu said, "but it wins people." "I'm not people," Rafik spat. "I'm the storm." "Then maybe it's time someone taught the storm some manners." Rafik charged without warning. Fists flew. The square lit up with motion. But Keanu wasn't afraid. He dodged, blocked, deflected with the grace of someone who had danced through darkness before. The fight wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. One man's quiet strength against another man's loud hate. Myra watched from behind a pillar, heart pounding. Each movement felt like a breath held too long. Then it happened. One of the bikers reached into his jacket and pulled something out. A bottle, wrapped with cloth, soaked in fuel. "They're going to burn the stall," someone screamed. Myra gasped. Keanu, still engaged with Rafik, saw it too late. But someone else didn't. Baba John burst into the square, grabbing the biker's arm just as he lit the flame. The bottle dropped, rolling across the stone. The fire never caught. Rafik cursed and threw a punch, catching Keanu in the side. Keanu staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he twisted, disarmed him, and finally pinned him down with nothing but his knee and his breath. "It's over," he said, voice like thunder. Sirens echoed in the distance. Someone had called the police. Rafik's men scattered like leaves. He lay still, eyes burning with hatred. But Keanu didn't look angry. He looked tired. He stood slowly, brushing dust from his jacket. Myra ran to him, breathless. "You're hurt," she said, tears threatening to fall again. I've been hurt before, he whispered. What matters is you're safe. The police took Rafik away that night. The town, shaken but stirred, began to wake up from its silence. One act of kindness had reminded them what courage looked like. But in the shadows of the nearby woods, someone else watched. Someone older, someone darker. And he wasn't just watching for revenge. He was watching for Keanu Reeves. Because years ago they had crossed paths and it had ended in blood. The man from the shadows dawn crept over the valley like a cautious guest, tiptoeing across rooftops and gently lifting the weight of the long, violent night. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of ash and old smoke. A cold mist lingered, curling along the streets of the small town as if it, too, was afraid to rise fully. Inside the tea stall, the warmth of flickering candles replaced the usual hum of morning chatter. Baba John moved quietly, his limp a little heavier after last night's scuffle. Every time his hand passed a bruise, his face twitched slightly, but he said nothing. Myra stood behind the counter trying to reheat leftover chai. Her cheek was still swollen and red from the tea burn, but she ignored the pain. She kept replaying everything in her head. Keanu stepping forward, the bikers retreating, the Molotov cocktail that never exploded, and above all, the calm in his eyes. The kind of calm that didn't come from never being hurt, but from surviving the worst and still choosing to protect others. Keanu hadn't spoken much after the fight. He helped clean up the square, lifted the trash can that had been tipped over, and helped Baba John sweep broken glass without a word. And now, he was gone. He'd left just before sunrise, walking up a trail behind the hills alone. Not running, just searching. There was something in him that wouldn't let him rest. In the woods, the ground was soft with dew. The leaves crunched faintly beneath his boots. Keanu walked with measured steps, the same way he had walked through many storms in his life. But today, something tugged at him deeper than usual. He couldn't shake the feeling. Not fear, not dread, but recognition. Someone had been watching him last night. He felt it in the shift of the air, in the stillness between movements. And he knew exactly who it might be. 10 years ago, in a city whose name he never said out loud, there was a man called Dawood, a man without mercy, a man who collected pain the way others collected trophies. He ran an underground network of fighters, people forced into cages for sport, gambling, and spectacle. Keanu had once infiltrated that world to rescue someone, a girl named Layla, his friend's daughter. They had almost died getting her out. But Dawood had survived, and Keanu had always known that one day he would resurface. And now, the quiet town that had become a healing space for a girl like Myra was no longer safe. Keanu stopped by a stream and looked at his reflection, a man with tired eyes, silver strands hiding in his beard and hands that had both held and broken. He crouched, dipped his fingers into the cold water, and whispered to no one, "I'm not the same man you remember." Behind him, a soft crack. Twig snapping. He turned slowly. On the ridge above, a silhouette stood beneath the trees. Tall, coat billowing slightly, face hidden under the shade of a wide hat. Keanu didn't move. Neither did the figure. But then the man raised his hand and pointed, not at Keanu, but at the town below. A warning. Keanu stood. The breeze carried the faintest trace of a familiar cologne, bitter and spiced. A scent he hadn't smelled in a decade. Dawood was here. Back in town, the mood was unsettled. The police had taken statements but left quickly after arresting Rafik. They had other towns to serve, other duties to perform, and besides, most of them didn't want to deal with a gang war on their hands. To them, this was just an incident, but to the people who lived here, it was the start of something much worse. "He left?" Myra asked, eyes scanning the road anxiously. Baba John nodded, setting down a tray of bread. He said he needed air. He shouldn't be alone. "Myra," Baba John said gently, "men like him are never really alone. Not inside." She bit her lip. Part of her wanted to stay put, to let things cool down, but another part, The part Keanu had awakened whispered that fear only wins when you let it close the door. So she stepped outside. She didn't have to go far. Keanu returned by midday, his coat dusted with leaves, his expression unreadable, but the moment Myra saw him, she knew something had changed. "You saw something," she said. He nodded slowly. "Someone." "Who?" He looked at Baba John, then back at her. "A man I hoped was gone." He didn't give details, not yet, but he did pull out his phone and made a call to a number he hadn't used in years. "It's me," he said. "I need a favor. I need background on a man named Dawood. Check if he's resurfaced anywhere, and check local properties. Any recent purchases near this region?" The voice on the other end was surprised. "You think he's here?" "I know he is." The call ended. Keanu looked at the tea stall, at the girl standing brave despite her pain, and at the village starting to whisper stories again. He had seen it too many times before. Darkness doesn't come all at once. It creeps in, tests the waters, and waits for people to look away. But not this time. That night, while the town slept, Dawood moved. He wasn't a man who showed up with noise. He entered like fog, slow, steady, and inescapable. His new base wasn't far, a ruined warehouse just outside the next village. From the outside, it looked abandoned, but inside lights flickered. Maps were pinned and voices whispered strategies. Rafik, bruised and humbled, knelt before Dawood with his head lowered. "You failed," Dawood said coldly. He wasn't just some stranger, Rafik stammered. He knew how to fight. Fast. Too fast. "Did you get his name?" They say it was Keanu Reeves." A long pause followed. Then Dawood chuckled softly. "Of course it is." He turned to the others in the room. "We are no longer just reclaiming pride. This is now personal." Keanu spent the next morning preparing the town quietly. He spoke to the shopkeepers, advised Baba John to close early, and even visited the local carpenter to help reinforce doors and windows. Myra watched all of it. She wanted to help, but she also felt something shift inside her. For the first time since the fire that took her parents, she wasn't thinking about escape. She was thinking about defense, about protecting something. "Teach me," she said. Suddenly, as they stood outside the stall watching the sky turn gold, Keanu looked at her. "Teach me how to stand up, not just watch." He saw the sincerity in her eyes, and the fear too. But underneath that, a spark of resilience that could one day become a fire of her own. "Okay," he said. "But understand this. Courage isn't about fists. It's about choosing not to run when everything tells you to." "Then I've already started," she whispered. He smiled. "Then we begin at sunrise." But as the light faded and the stars came out, neither of them knew that Dawood's men had already entered the town, and the first place they planned to strike was the tea stall. Fire beneath the surface, the wind that night came in strange pulses, almost as if the earth itself was trying to whisper a warning. The stars were muted, half hidden behind a slow-moving cloud cover, and the air felt dense, like something was about to break. Inside the tea stall, all was quiet. Baba John had closed early as Keanu advised, and locked every door and window. Myra lay on a thin mattress behind the counter, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling beams. Her cheek throbbed faintly, but her thoughts had moved past the pain. Her mind was wrapped around something deeper now, who Keanu really was, why he had risked himself for her, and what kind of storm they were about to face. In the corner, Keanu sat on a wooden crate, his back against the wall, coat draped loosely around his shoulders. He wasn't asleep. He rarely slept when he sensed danger. Instead, he listened to the wind, the rustle of dry leaves, the ticking of the old clock above the kitchen door. Every sound mattered. Silence was never just silence. It was either peace or the pause before impact. At exactly 2:47 a.m. he heard it. Not loud, not obvious, just a faint shift, the creak of weight on wood. Somewhere outside, he rose slowly, pressing, a finger to his lips when Myra stirred. She didn't speak. She sat up, alert, already sensing that something wasn't right. Keanu moved to the window and tilted the curtain just enough to peek through. 3 shadows moved across the alley. One stayed near the back entrance, another at the side wall. The third approached the front door with deliberate slowness. Keanu's body tensed, not from panic, but readiness, the kind of readiness forged over years of survival. His voice was calm when he whispered, "They're here." Baba John, awakened by the quiet tension in the room, blinked at them from his mat. "Are you sure?" Keanu nodded. "They're trying to be quiet. That means they want to hurt, not just scare." "What do we do?" Myra asked, her voice steadier than even she expected. Keanu looked at her. "We hold the line." Outside, the shadow by the front door knelt down and began working on the lock with expert hands. Not a thug, a trained hand. Someone used to breaking in without noise. Keanu pulled the small curtain rod from the window frame and passed it to Myra. "This is all you need. You don't need to fight. Just distract if needed. Never go for strength. Go for speed and surprise." She nodded, gripping the rod like a sword. Baba John grabbed an old iron pipe he kept for fixing leaks. Keanu waded back to the door, ears tuned. When the lock finally gave a faint click, he stepped sideways and let the door swing inward. The first intruder entered in a crouch, expecting to face a counter or furniture. Instead, he was met by Keanu's elbow driving into his side with surgical force. The man collapsed instantly, breath gone, knees hitting the floor with a thud. The second man at the side window smashed the glass and tried to crawl through. But before he could gain footing, Myra was there, not with violence but precision. She jabbed the curtain rod between the window frame and his shoulder, twisting just enough to knock him off balance. He tumbled backward, hitting the ground, hard outside. "That's it," Keanu said under his breath, both to her and himself. But the third man, the one at the back, wasn't clumsy. He kicked the back door open with brute force, stepping in with a short baton in hand. His eyes were sharp, his body language efficient. He locked eyes with Keanu. "Boss sends his regards," he said with a cold grin. Keanu didn't reply. He stepped into the man's space before he could lift the baton, grabbed his wrist, twisted, and delivered a knee to the man's gut with precision. The baton clattered to the floor. Keanu grabbed it and stepped back, ready for another round, but the attacker didn't rise. He coughed, then groaned, clutching his side. Keanu didn't take chances. He dragged all 3 out to the alley and tied their hands with wire from the back shed. "They weren't here to rob us," Keanu said after returning inside. "They were scouting," Baba John added grimly, "testing our response." "What do we do now?" Myra asked, still gripping the rod. Keanu looked at the far end of the room where a family photo hung crookedly on the wall. He adjusted it gently before replying. "Now," he said, "we go to him, before he brings war here." At sunrise, Keanu left with a small satchel and nothing more. He didn't tell Myra where exactly he was going. He only said, "You'll know if I don't come back." Myra's heart sank. "Don't say that. You need to be strong whether I do or don't." And then he was gone. Keanu's journey to DeWood's hideout was not difficult. He had already mapped the warehouse, location from the call logs his contact had provided. It wasn't far, but it was heavily guarded. He didn't plan to sneak in. He planned to walk straight through the front door. When he arrived, the warehouse looked empty. Vines had crawled across the rusting metal walls. A broken sign swung on a hook above. But Keanu knew better. He stepped inside, boots echoing on the concrete. DeWood waited in the center of the room, sitting on a chair like a king on a rusted throne. His hair was thinner now, his face older, but his eyes, the same eyes from 10 years ago, still glowed with cruelty. "Keanu," he said with a slow, poisonous smile, "you've aged, but the fire's still in your eyes." "You should have stayed buried," Keanu replied, "and you should have stayed in Hollywood." Keanu walked closer. "You sent men after a girl, after a tea stall. That's not revenge, that's cowardice." "It was a message. Dawood said, rising. You broke my world once. Now I break yours. Slowly. Keanu looked around at the empty chairs and closed crates. This isn't your world anymore. Just shadows and dust. You really think you can stop what's coming? I think I already did. A loud rumble echoed behind them. Police trucks, more than a dozen, lights flashing, sirens silent but visible. Keanu had called them before he even left town. You always liked drama, Dawood hissed. No, Keanu said softly, as the doors burst open and armed officers stormed in. I like endings. As Dawood was arrested, Keanu looked him in the eye one last time. Not with hate, but with calm. You had power once, Keanu said, but you used it to scare the broken. I use mine to protect them. Dawood screamed as he was dragged away. But Keanu didn't stay to watch. He walked out and into the light. By the time he returned to the village, it was afternoon. Baba John saw him first and without a word placed a fresh cup of tea on the counter. Myra rushed out the door and stopped just short of him. He looked at her, exhausted but peaceful. It's done, he said. You're safe? She asked. We're safe. And for the first time in weeks, months, maybe years, Myra smiled without fear. But just as they sat down to rest, Baba John stepped outside holding a torn piece of paper. This was left at the door, he said. Keanu unfolded it. It was a photograph. A young girl with a scar across her cheek, and written beneath in sharp black ink. She's not the only one we remember. Keanu's face hardened. It's not over, he whispered. Ashes and revelations, the air had shifted again. Not the weather, though rain loomed heavy behind the clouds, but something subtler, deeper, an energy that wrapped itself around the town like a tightening thread, invisible but impossible to ignore. Even as birds chirped and shopkeepers opened shutters, there was a tension beneath the surface, a silence between the sounds. KeanuReeves stood at the edge of the tea stall, the crumpled photograph in his hand, staring at the scarred face printed on it. The photo wasn't old. It wasn't from years ago. It had been taken recently, days at most, and it was unmistakably Mira. Baba John hovered nearby, concern etched into every wrinkle. What does it mean? He asked softly. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He kept staring at the image, eyes narrowing not at the scar but at the faint shadow in the background. A symbol scrawled on a wall. It was subtle, barely visible, but Keanu recognized it. A broken circle intersected by a jagged line. It was Dawood's mark, but not just Dawood's. It was the sign of a splinter group, one that operated even deeper than his known ring. A faction that trained children, molded them through fear and turned them into tools. Keanu turned slowly to Myra, who stood near the kitchen door, her arms crossed, face pale but composed. I need to ask you something, he said gently. And it might hurt, she nodded. I think I already know what it's about. Your scar, he said. It didn't happen in the fire, did it? Her silence was answer enough. She took a deep breath, then stepped forward and sat down on the floor, legs crossed, eyes distant. The fire was real, she began. But it wasn't an accident, and it wasn't the start. Keanu crouched, beside her, waiting. When I was little, she said, voice soft and trembling. My family lived outside town near the river. My father worked odd jobs and my mother taught me how to read tea leaves. We were happy. Poor, but happy. One night, a group of men came to the village. They said they were offering scholarships for kids. They wanted to train leaders. Everyone thought it was charity. But it wasn't, Keanu said quietly. No, she replied. They took 6 of us. I remember the truck smelled like gasoline. They took us to a compound somewhere beyond the forest. It was made of tin and wire. They didn't use names. They gave us numbers. Baba John covered his mouth, stunned. Mine was 7, Myra whispered. They taught us how to obey, not think, how to react, how to ignore pain, and they punished the ones who hesitated. Keanu's hands curled into fists. Dawood ran that place. He visited, she said. But he wasn't the worst one. There was someone else, a woman. They called her Madame Kasira. She was cold, never raised her voice, never touched anyone. But when she looked at you, you felt like your thoughts weren't yours anymore. Keanu felt a chill go down his spine. He had heard that name. Once. Whispered in a dossier he read during an off-the-record mission. Madame Kasira wasn't just a handler. She was a brainwasher, a psychological architect who could turn any child into a weapon with no wounds visible on the outside. How did you escape? He asked. Myra swallowed hard. There was a fire. Someone, one of the older girls, set it to destroy the files. She said if the world forgot our numbers, we'd have a chance to be people again. I don't know if she made it out. I ran. I didn't stop until I collapsed in the alley. That's where Baba John found me. The old man wiped a tear from his cheek. She never told me that part. I thought the fire was just bad luck. Keanu sat back, the pieces falling into place, in his mind. Dawood's interest in the town, his attack on the tea stall, the photo, it wasn't random. It was deliberate. And worse, it meant Kasira was still active. They left that photo as a message, Keanu said. Not just to scare us, to warn us they want her back. Why now? Myra asked. After all these years? Keanu stood, pacing. Maybe because Dawood's gone and she's taking over. Maybe she's collecting the old numbers again. Or maybe you have something she doesn't want you to remember. Myra blinked. Like what? Files, evidence, locations. Maybe you saw something. Something small, but important. Baba John shook his head. She's just a child. No, Keanu said, looking at her with quiet pride. She's a survivor, and that makes her dangerous to people who live in shadows. Just then, the lights in the tea stall flickered. Outside, the wind picked up. The silence returned. A car engine rumbled to a stop down the road. Keanu turned to Myra. Pack a bag. We can't stay here. But Myra didn't move. If I run, now I'll always be running. Keanu hesitated. Teach me, she said again, like you promised. He wanted to argue, to protect her, to keep her from this world. But he also knew, deep down, that if she ran now it would undo everything she had rebuilt. He nodded. Then we train. For the next 3 days, Keanu stayed in the old stone barn on the edge of town, away from curious eyes. He turned it into a safe house and training ground. He taught Myra more than defense. He taught her awareness, how to listen, how to move without being noticed, how to read threats before they became attacks. She practiced every hour, and though her hands blistered and her muscles ached, she didn't stop. Pain isn't the enemy, Keanu told her. Forgetting why you fight is. On the 4th morning, a drone flew over the field. Small, silent, almost invisible. Keanu shot it down with a slingshot he had modified from a child's toy. They were being watched again. That night, Myra had a dream. She was back in the compound. The cold metal walls, the numbers, the silence between children, who had learned not to cry. But this time the dream took her to a room she hadn't remembered before, a steel door, a locked cabinet, and inside, a book, red leather, no title. She woke up gasping. I remember something, she told Keanu. A book. His eyes sharpened. What kind of book? They never let us see it. But I remember the symbol, the circle with the line. And I remember Kasira always locking it away before guests arrived. Keanu leaned forward. It might hold the identities of everyone they trained. Or worse, their future targets. Myra looked at him. What if that's what she wants? Then we get to it first. Keanu placed a call to his contact once more. I need a location, a red leather logbook, somewhere in the Northern Valley. Compound was abandoned 10 years ago, probably rebuilt. Kasira might be operating there again. The voice on the line was fast. I'll check satellite images. Anything else? Keanu looked at Myra. "Find me number 7, he said, "but make sure the world knows she's not a number anymore." As they prepared to leave, another envelope arrived, slipped under the door in the middle of the night. This time, it wasn't a photo. It was a burnt piece of red leather, and in faint ink, one word was written across the top. "Remember." Keanu picked it up slowly. "She's not warning us anymore," he whispered. "She's daring us to come." The red book. The valley narrowed as Keanu's motorcycle sped through the winding path, dust rising behind him like a ghost trailing his journey. Seated behind him, Myra held on tightly. Not from fear, but focus. She wasn't the same girl who flinched at every loud voice or looked down at every cruel word. She had grown in ways no one could measure. Her strength now came from within, and ahead of them was the place where her past had been caged. The old compound was nestled in the northern cliffs, hidden by tall trees and mist that never quite cleared. It had been rebuilt, just as Keanu suspected. New steel gates, security, cameras tucked into branches, fresh tire tracks in the mud. But the air carried the same darkness Myra remembered. She shivered as the trees thinned, and the memory of those metal walls crept back into her chest like vines she thought she'd uprooted. Keanu slowed down before reaching the clearing and parked behind a wall of dense brush. They moved on foot, creeping through overgrowth. He handed her a small radio and a flashlight. "If we get separated, you find high ground. If things go wrong, you run, and you don't look back." Myra looked at him. "I won't leave without you." He didn't argue, he just gave her a nod. They reached the compound's outer wall. It was newer now, electrified. But Keanu had studied the design. Just like before, he found a blind spot near the drainage channel beneath the wall. Small, enough for a child, tight for an adult. They slid through one by one, mud coating their elbows, silence their only language. Inside, the compound was quiet, but not empty. Voices echoed faintly in the distance. Instructions, movement, footsteps, training. Keanu pressed his back against a wall and listened. "They're active," he whispered. She started over. Myra's heart pounded. They hadn't come just to confirm what was happening. They came to end it. He guided her to the south wing, where she remembered the red book being hidden. The halls were cold, lined with fluorescent lights that hummed like insects. Cameras turned slowly, scanning. Keanu timed their patterns and led her through blind zones. One wrong move and everything would erupt. They reached a rusted door. She stared at it. "This was the room," she whispered, "where she locked it." "Away!" Keanu pried open the lock with a small tool from his belt. It clicked softly, and the door creaked open. The room inside was smaller than Myra remembered. It had changed. Shelves now lined the walls, filled with folders and electronic drives. But at the center, inside a clear, reinforced glass case, was the red book. It was real, still locked, still guarded, but not forgotten. Keanu studied the casing. Motion sensor, pressure alarm. It's wired to trigger if lifted without the right sequence. "Can we disable it?" she asked. "Not fast enough," he replied, "but we can trade one alarm for another." From his bag, he pulled out a smoke canister. "What are you doing?" she asked. "We're triggering the fire system. Old buildings like this still rely on manual override when smoke is detected. That'll force a ventilation lockdown. It gives us 90 seconds, and after that, they'll know we're here." He pulled the pin and tossed the canister into the far corner. Smoke filled the room quickly, snaking through, vents licking at the sensors. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and with one swift blow from his elbow, Keanu shattered the glass case and grabbed the book. "Go!" he shouted. They ran. Down corridors, past sirens, through confusion. Guards shouted. One spotted them, raised a weapon, but Myra, fast and sure, swung a broken pipe and struck the man's knee, sending him to the floor. She didn't stop. Didn't look back. They burst through the emergency exit and sprinted across the outer field, alarms trailing behind them like fire. But as they reached the fence, She froze. Madame Cassira stood there, arms crossed, perfectly calm. She wore all black, her face untouched by time, her eyes cold and calculating. Her voice, when she spoke, didn't rise above a whisper. 7, she said. Myra's breath caught. The sound of that number hit like a chain wrapping around her throat. You were always meant to return, Cassira said. You don't belong out there with soft hearts and small dreams. You were built to lead. I wasn't built, Myra said. I survived. Keanu stepped between them. It's over. No, Cassira replied. You think you've won because you took a book? Because you knocked down a few doors? We're not a building, Mr. Reeves. We're an idea, and ideas don't die. Keanu looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. I've seen enough of your kind to know you're not an idea, he said. You're just fear wearing a mask. Cassira smiled thinly. And fear always finds a new face. At that moment, police vehicles flooded the road behind them, called by Keanu's friend who had been tracking his signal since dawn. Officers poured out, weapons raised. Cassira's expression changed. For the first time, she looked rattled, steppy. Away from the girl, a voice called out. Keanu held up his hands. Myra did the same. But Cassira didn't move. Instead, she turned to Myra. This world will never protect you, she said. It will praise you when you bleed for it and forget you when you heal. Myra stepped forward, defying every tremor in her bones. Maybe, she whispered. But at least I'll still be human. Cassira took one step back. Then another. But the officers surrounded her. She was arrested without a fight. But as she was led away, she said one last thing, her eyes locked on Myra. You'll come back. They always do. Weeks later, the town was quieter again. The tea stall had been repainted. Baba John's limp had healed slightly, and the wound on Myra's cheek had faded into something almost invisible, not erased, just softened. Keanu sat at a table with her, the red book open between them. Inside were names, dates, codes, photos, proof of the network. What happens to it? She asked. We give it to the right people, he said. But not before we make copies. Why? Because the world forgets, Keanu said, but we don't let it. She turned a page, pausing when she saw her own number. 7, she murmured. Keanu reached across the table and gently crossed it out with a pen. Your name is Myra, he said. And names carry power. A long silence followed. Then she smiled. And for the first time since she was taken, she believed it.